violent and harmful than slavery in the 1700s? Because we claim to live in a time when everyone has equal human rights.
Right.
And we're all created equal and treated equal. And, it's the hypocrisy that makes it so much more repugnant. Back then, it's like, well, they are fit to be slaves. And it was the way of things. That doesn't excuse it, but the violence had some kind of mental and social, even religious justification centuries ago. And it took a band of enlightened people to say, no, that's not right. And abolitionists fought and won freedom for slaves in the world. Or did they? Because now we live in a time where you can't legally own another person or exploit them like a slave on any patch of this planet. And yet it happens at the bottom of our global economic order more than people realize. And what's important about cobalt is it's kind of the distillation of centuries of this arc. Because as I said, there's never been a single example of worse suffering that generates more money and touches the lives of more people around the world than this right here.
The intense hypocrisy of this age we're living in, especially in this country, where we're so focused on social justice and we're so focused on equality and treating people with kindness and dignity, and the fact that we're talking about this and communicating on this on devices that were constructed by slaves.
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
that's so insane. It's so hard to admit.
Yeah.
It's so hard to even. I believe every word you're saying, but there's a part of my mind that doesn't want to accept it.
I understand
that it could be possibly that fucked up.
That's right. Like that we're capable of it.
Right.
And it's surely we're better than this now, right? I mean, haven't we fought enough fights, shed enough blood, and made enough progress? That we're better than this. That what we're talking about today can't and shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be possible. But the fact that it is, it speaks to that how little has actually changed in some ways.
And the fact that a small handful of brave journalists are bringing this to light. In light of so many problems that we know about in the world that get all of our attention in the news every day. This is one of the most horrific.
Yes.
And it's very, very difficult to get information about it.
By design. I mean, by design, it's been that way. It always starts with a handful, though, Joe. I mean, great change starts with a handful of people who stand up and say, this won't, I can't tolerate this. We shouldn't tolerate it. Humanity should be better than this. And if they're lucky and persistent enough, they build a social movement that can achieve some progress. We see this throughout history. The history of human rights starts with some small group of people who want to see something change, something important change, and build a movement around it. But it starts with truth. It has to start with truth. It can't. Dispelling the fictions that power tells us, so that things can stay the same. It always starts with shining light into that darkness and bringing ground truth out into the world.
That truth is so horrific, though. You could see how it would be human nature for the people involved in it to try to suppress it and ignore it and to try to figure out a way to keep this information from getting out, because the amount of change that they would have to impart would be it's a monumental task to change the of how this stuff is acquired.
Intellectually I can understand the reluctance to acknowledge it, because yes, it makes you question how these companies have been operating for years, right? And what else do we not know?
Right.
What else do we not know? There's going to be other problems. And the minute you acknowledge one, people will inevitably ask, well, wait a minute, what else do I need to know now?
What other problems do you think could possibly exist?
Yeah, oh, man. So in terms of this particular industry, I mean, there's still lingering problems with the microprocessor, those 3TG conflict minerals in Eastern Congo. There's all of that. None of that's been fixed. It just, people lose attention span. It's just that you can get those things in a lot of other places. Gold, especially, tantalum, tungsten. You can get those things in a lot of other places. So it's possible to actually redirect and kind of clean up a supply chain. And I imagine much of that work has been done. But do we know everything we need to know about how lithium is being pulled out of the ground? Because that's the other crucial component to these batteries. Be it human rights or environmental sustainability? Do we know everything we need to know about the manufacturing part of this? I mean, you hear stories every once in a while, these facilities in China, and they've got kids in there, and they're working 22 hours a day, and they're not being paid that well, and then it's quickly hush-hush and problem solved, don't worry about it. I can't get into China. I've tried a few times to get a visa. I've not succeeded as of yet, but I'd love to go poking around in some of those factories and get a sense of what's really happening. Because I know from what I've seen on the ground in the Congo with Chinese mining companies, human rights is an afterthought. It doesn't enter into the calculus. It's resource and feed it up the chain. So stands to reason that similar things like with Uyghurs, and there's actually some bipartisan support on the Uyghur issue. But, there are possibly massive forced labor camps relating to electronic manufacturing as well as apparel, solar panels. And, there's another whole truth there that we don't even have a grasp on. So, once you start opening the doors and say, okay, yes, this is a big problem. What are the other big problems out there? Because people will start looking, and then suddenly the bottom end of much of the global economic order is revealed to be tainted with an array of problematic labor conditions, from child labor to sweatshop labor to penny wage labor to forced labor, labor abuse. Why is everything so cheap? Right? Why is everything, number one, made over there, and then number two, so cheap? That's the logic of slavery wasn't ever